Hello and welcome to another study in the book of Genesis. Today we'll be in Genesis chapters number 30 through 33, and the title of our lesson is Rachel and Leah. It's lesson number 7. It's page number 47 in your quarterly if you have one. It's dated January 17th, 2021. The title of the lesson is Rachel and Leah, but in these three chapters there is a lot more to cover than just Leah and Rachel. So we hope that we can shed a little bit of light on the three chapters and make our way through here in the short time that we do have. So we're thankful that you are here once again, and we pray God's blessings on this lesson. Now, our application for today's lesson is there found on page number 47. It states that the student will conclude that God is always leading him, and when he follows God, he will be a blessing to others. God, for the child of God, God is always leading. He is always guiding our lives, and it's up to us whether or not we're going to follow his lead. We must have understanding of children as children of God. When we do follow his lead, he will bless us, and we will be blessing to others as well. Now, in today's lesson, it's a very interesting lesson, like they all have been here in this family. But in today's lesson, we witness the continued antics of a dysfunctional family. And yes, this family was a family of God. It was promises that had made to this family, but they were dysfunctional. They had things going on in their life that was contrary to what God would have them to do. They were trying to figure things out time and time again, falling short every single time. So they were dysfunctional. Now, as stated in the lesson application, even though this family did not always follow the leadership of God in their lives, he was still leading them. And he is still leading us today. He's still leading our dysfunctional families today. So, well, you're not talking about, you might say, well, you're not talking about my family. My family's perfect. And I used to really think that as being a parish. And I still am proud to be a parish, but I have an understanding now, the older I get, that we are dysfunctional, and we come short of the glory of God. But praise be to God that he loves us, and he's blessed us, and he continues to bless us. So we must have an understanding of that. Just because this family was dysfunctional doesn't mean that God couldn't use them. Now, if God can use this family, and he did, and he still does use this family, he can surely use yours and mine. So if he can use this family, he can use yours as well. Now, getting into our lesson focus, into our chapters, we found out at the end of chapter number 29 that Leah, which is the rejected wife of Jacob, bears 4 sons while Rachel is barren. So this begins a controversy, if you will, between the sisters, Leah and Rachel. Leah is fertile. She has bare four sons to Jacob, while Rachel is barren. Now, this leads to a competition, if you will. It leads to struggles within the family. Leah and Rachel wanted what the other had. Well, what was that? Well, Leah had children. Rachel wanted children. Rachel had the love of her husband, Jacob. Jacob loved Rachel, and he would shun. It's understood if you read down through the lessons here, through these things, it is seen here. If you read these things, that Leah was pushed aside, if you will. She was not given the attention that Rachel was given, and it worked hard on her, and she struggled with this. So while Leah was able to bear children, Rachel was not, and this began struggles. Rachel was loved by Jacob, while Leah was not desired like Rachel was of Jacob's love. So that brings us to our lesson, chapter number 30. We're going to read verses 1 through 13 to get things started. And it's jealousy in Jacob's family. And so let's see where Holy Spirit leads us today in our lesson. Genesis chapter 30, verses 1 through 13 to get started. And when Rachel saw that she bare Jacob no children, Rachel envied her sister, and said unto Jacob, Give me children, or else I die. And Jacob's anger was kindled against Rachel, and he said, Am I in God's stead, who hath withheld from from thee the fruit of the womb. And she said, Behold, my maid Bilhah, go in unto her, and she shall bear upon my knees, that I may also have children by her. And she gave him Bilhah, her handmaid, to wife, and Jacob went in unto her. And Bilhah conceived, and bare Jacob a son. And Rachel said, God hath judged me, and hath also heard my voice, and hath given me a son. Therefore called she his name Dan. And Bilhah, Rachel's maid, conceived again, and bare Jacob a second son. And Rachel said, With great wrestlings have I wrestled with my sister, and I have prevailed. And she called his name Naphtali. When Leah saw that she had left bearing, she took Zilpah, her maid, and gave her Jacob to wife. And Zilpah, Leah's maid, bare Jacob a son. And Leah said, A troop cometh. And she called his name Gad. And Zilpah, and Leah's maid, bare Jacob a second son. And Leah said, Happy am I, for the daughters will call me blessed. And she called his name Asher. In verse number 1, we see that there was some envying going on. In verse number 1, it says, Rachel saw that she bare Jacob no children, while, of course, Leah was bearing children for Jacob. Rachel envied her sister. This envied word means it's a jealous anger, and she was provoked, if you will, to a jealous anger. It went a little beyond just jealousy. It became contested between these two sisters. She envied, she had jealous anger toward her sister. In verse number 2, we see that Rachel begs Jacob to give her children or she will die. And Jacob's anger was kindled against Rachel, and he said, Am I in God's stead? Who hath withheld from thee the fruit of the womb? Jacob gets a little angry, if you will, with Rachel and proclaims that, Am I God? Have I actually been the one that's been withholding? Some commentators wrote that possibly Rachel was trying to blame Jacob for not giving her children. I don't believe that. Jacob did have other children, but Rachel here is angry, and she is to the point of death. She wants to bear children. She's very jealous of her sister. And in verses 3 through 8, we see that things happen where Bilhah comes into play, which was the handmaid for Rachel. And it states there that in verse number 3, and she shall bear upon my knees. Now, we've heard this before back when Hagar gave birth to Ishmael. We've heard this between the knees. Now, from what the commentaries I've read and in the study that I've done, this was a common practice in this culture, to where if the mistress could not bear, then they would give the handmaids, and the handmaids would become if for lack of a better term, a surrogate mother for the mistress. And this is what Rachel did here with Bilhah. She gave Bilhah to Jacob, and what they would do is that as the child was being born, the handmaid Bilhah in this instance would sit between the mistress's legs as she's having, or the mistress would hold the handmaid. Rachel there was holding there that between her knees as she was having this child. And then once the child was born, immediately that child would not be given to the handmaid or Bilhah in this instance. It would immediately be given to Rachel, and Rachel would place that baby in her lap and would swaddle that baby and then take that baby as her own. And this is what they did in this culture here. This is what is going on. So Bilhah has the child, and immediately this child is placed in the lap of Rachel. And then at this point, Bilhah has no rights whatsoever to this child. This child, according to that culture, is now Rachel's child, is born of Rachel. So this is what's going on. This is exactly what happened when Hagar gave birth to Ishmael. Bilhah here becomes the surrogate mother, like I stated before, for Rachel, and bears two sons, Dan and Naphtali. So Dan and Naphtali did this twice here for Rachel, and two sons are born by Bilhah. We find in verses 9 through 13 that Leah is not going to be outdone with this. Leah is not having children, so Leah wants to produce more children for Jacob as well because of the envying that's going on. So what does Leah do? Leah gives her handmaid, Zilpah, to Jacob, and Zilpah bears two sons, Gad and Asher. Now, so there's a lot going on here between these two sisters, and all I can say is bless Jacob here with two wives, not working out too well for him with these two sisters that are arguing, and they're using Jacob and the handmaids there. I do not believe that the Lord was in this. The Lord allowed it. And his sovereignty seen through all these things. These were children of Jacob. All of these were children of Jacob, Jacob's seed. But these two sisters were having a competition here in this household. Now, in verses 14 through 24, not part of our focus here, but Leah bears Issachar, Zebulun, and also a daughter, Dinah. And Dinah will come into play in the next couple of lessons here, the next lesson or two. But she bears two more sons, Issachar and Zebulun, and a daughter, Dinah. God opens the womb of Rachel at this time, and Rachel actually bears Joseph here. So now Jacob's desires to go home is our next part. So after all this has gone on, Joseph has been born. And now we find in chapter 30, verses 25 through 27, Jacob's ready to go home now. And so let's read these verses, 25 through 27. And it came to pass, when Rachel had borne Joseph, that Jacob said unto Laban, Send me away, that I may go into mine own place, into my country. Give me my wives, my children, for whom I have served thee, and let me go. For thou knowest my service, which I have done thee. And Laban said unto him, I pray thee, if I have found favor in thine eyes, tarry. For I have learned by experience that the Lord hath blessed me for thy sake. Now in verses 25 through 26, we see that after Joseph is born, the 14 years of service had come to an end. Jacob had served 7 years for what he thought was Rachel. He got Leah. And then he served another 7 years for Rachel. Total of 14 years here that he had served to have both of these daughters here of Laban. And now it's time for Jacob to return home to Canaan. So Jacob does the right thing. He goes and he seeks permission and blessings from Laban to return home. He's fulfilled what has been given to him, the 14 years, and now he's ready to return home. And he'd like to return home with his wives, their handmaids, and his children. At this time, he has 11 sons and at least one daughter. Only Dinah is mentioned here. So at least one daughter. We know 11 sons total and at least one daughter here. And he says here in verse number, I believe number 25, that I may go into mine own place. And I thought this was interesting here. Mine own place he speaks of here. Now, it speaks of him wanting to go home back to Canaan, but it carries a little bit more emphasis. And the emphasis here is on a standing up, an uprising from a low position to a standing position. So Jacob is wanting to do more than just go home. He wants to go home and have the blessings of God and get in a larger position. If this suggests that the position here is the one takes expecting to prosper. So Jacob here, he's more or less just spinning his wheels, working for another man, and he's ready to go home, and he's ready to start a life with his family and to prosper under the blessings of God. And this is what he's talking about when he says he wants to go to his own place and to my country here. And the country here is talking about Canaan. Now, in verse number 27, knowing he had been blessed by the God of Jacob, and for his sake, what does Laban do? Laban was in no hurry for Jacob and his family to leave. Laban realized that because of Jacob and the God of Jacob, he realized that was why he was being blessed so greatly, is because Jacob was there, and Laban did not want Jacob to leave. He wanted to continue to enjoy the blessings that Jacob had brought. Now, it's not, once again, not part of our lesson focus, but we look at at the end of the chapter here, verses 28 through 43. A lot goes on, not part of our focus. So I'd like to run through the end of chapter 30 and also chapter 31 and 32 before we get to our last part here. If you haven't had a chance to read these chapters, I encourage you to read through these chapters. But I'll try to summarize here of what is going on here. Now that Jacob wants to go home and Laban wants him to stay. So what do? Well, the two schemers here, Laban and Jacob, the two schemers, they work out a deal. So what is the deal? Jacob agrees to stay and serve Laban under a condition that he would get all the speckled and spotted cattle and goats and the brown sheep from Laban's flocks born under his care. So Jacob has been tending the flocks for 14 years. He knows exactly what he's doing here. But he says here, for the deal that I'll do, I'll continue to work, but I want to take, I want as pay, I want all the speckled, the spotted, the lambs, and the sheep, all of those, excuse me, and I want to be able to take those with me, and those become mine. You can have all of the ones that are pure white, pure color, pure one color, but I'll take the speckled and the striped as my own as payment. Now, through this, we know that if you read that, Jacob takes and he uses reeds and he splits those reeds and he puts them in the troughs where the cattle comes and waters. And this is a trick, if you will, that some farmers and shepherds had used down through the years to try to get certain animals to mate and have certain types of animals and shun the other animals. So this is what Jacob does, and God blesses Jacob here. He intervenes, God does, and increases Jacob's flocks and wealth. So Jacob, during this time, his flocks become stronger and stronger and more abundant, while Laban's begins to dwindle. And so God is blessing Jacob once again here. And Jacob, being the shepherd that he is, he knows what he's doing as well. Chapter 31 leads us to where Laban and his sons, particularly, they grow resentful of Jacob. Because why? Because Jacob's flocks are growing, they're the strong, and it seems that Laban's flocks are dwindling, and the ones they do have are weaklings. And this reason for this is because God has blessed Jacob, and of course what Jacob did as well. So Jacob's wealth continues to increase, and Laban's wealth and flocks dwindle. Now Jacob is told by God to return to the land of his fathers and promises here, and God promises his presence with Jacob once again. And during this time, so what does Jacob do? Jacob secretly departs with his family and his flocks. So he leaves. He takes all of his flocks, his family, and he leaves Laban without even saying goodbye. He just takes off. Well, Laban hears of this, that Jacob and his family has left, and Laban is not happy with this. And after 3 days, upon hearing of their departure, Laban immediately sets out after Jacob. So Jacob has a 3 days ahead start out of Laban before Laban even realizes they're gone. And so Laban immediately sets out after Jacob. During this time, he's trying to catch Jacob. He sleeps one night, and God comes to him in a dream and tells him not to harm Jacob. And tells him basically to be very, very careful of how you deal with God's man. So after 7 days of chasing Jacob, Laban catches up with Jacob's company, and he catches him there. Now, Laban's not happy at all. Why is he not happy? Well, there's a couple of things here. First and foremost, he's not happy that he was not able to say goodbye to his daughters and to his grandchildren. He was not able to give them a celebration, to send them off with things. It talks about mirth and celebrations. And he was not able to say goodbye to his grandchildren here. So he's not happy with that at all. Now, another thing he's not happy about is that someone has stolen his idols. And that someone is Rachel. There's a lot of different speculations. It's not part of our focus. We won't get into this of why Rachel took these idols and what exactly these idols meant. But they were important to Laban, and Rachel took them. Now, Jacob had no idea that Rachel had taken those idols. And so Laban is mad that he was not able to say goodbye. And then he mentions to Jacob also that there's a thief in your midst. Someone has stolen my idols. Well, this makes Jacob very angry. Jacob has no idea about it. And Jacob says, well, fine. If you can find who stole your idols, then you can have your way with that person. You kill that person if you like. Now, once again, Jacob did not know that Rachel had stolen those things. So Laban searches all the tents. He searches Jacob's tent. He searches Leah's tent. Rachel, this time, takes the idols and hides them in the camel's luggage, if you will. And then she sits on top of this luggage here, on top of the idols, and proclaims that it's the time of the month for her, for women here, and that she cannot stand up. She asked her father that if she can remain sitting because it is that time for the woman. And Laban agrees. He searches all around, does not find the idols. Rachel has hidden them. Nothing is found. Now, Jacob then comes out after he gets through searching. Jacob then rebukes Laban. He rebukes Laban. Now Jacob is not happy. You've now accused me of being a thief, and you found nothing. So the two men here, Laban and Jacob, they make a covenant with one another. And this covenant is a non-aggression covenant. They can agree to go pass over where they are right now, but they cannot do it with aggression. And so this is a non-aggression covenant between each other. Laban then is given the opportunity to say a proper goodbye to his sons and daughters, and he blesses them and returns home the next day. Now that brings us to chapter number 32. A lot going on here. Chapter number 32, in the first 26 verses here. On his way home now, Jacob is continuing on his way home. He is met by the angels of God. That's mentioned in the first part of chapter number 32. Jacob then sends word to his brother Esau. Jacob is still worried about Esau and the fact that Esau, the last time he saw Esau promised to kill Jacob once he had an opportunity. And this is still going on. Jacob still believes that Esau is out to kill him. So Jacob sends word and says, look, Esau, I'm coming back into the land. He tells the messengers to tell Esau these things. And then what does Esau do? Well, Esau immediately gets 400 men and starts heading toward Jacob. Well, this terrifies Jacob. Jacob gets word that Esau is on his way, and he has 400 men with him. And so Jacob is terrified. So what does Jacob do? Jacob goes to God and says, God, what do I do? And that's not what Jacob does. Jacob divides his family. He divides his family, and then he begs God for protection. Now, once Jacob is alone during this time, as his family goes over the brook and they have left, now Jacob is by himself and he goes to sleep on this evening. This is when Jacob wrestles with God, has the wrestling with God. He's wrestling with himself. He's wrestling with God in his sleep in a dream. And that brings us to our last part today, chapter number 32, verses 27 and 28, chapter number 32. Let me get there right quick. So after Jacob's wrestling, he says, and verse 27, and he said unto him, what is thy name? And he said, Jacob. And he said, thy name shall be called no more Jacob, but Israel, for as a prince hast thou power with God and with men, and hast prevailed. So Jacob wrestles with God. And God changes his name from Jacob to Israel. Jacob, the meaning of the word Jacob, his name, means trickster. It also means the crooked heel catcher. Remember, Jacob grabbed the heel of Esau as they were being born. So trickster, the crooked heel catcher, is no longer. He is now Israel. Israel's name, Israel means God prevails, or one who has power with God. We know during this wrestling that Jacob dislocates his hip, if you will, and he walks with a hip, is understood, for the rest of his life. He's halted for the rest of his life because he wrestles with himself, with God, during the night. and actually takes and puts his hip out of joint. Now, as children of God, let's tie this all together. All this has went on here. We know the title of the lesson was was Rachel and Leah. It covered so much more than that. So with all three of these chapters here and the chapters that are coming up, let's try to bring it all together to what we must glean from this. As children of God, may we have a better understanding that God is always leading us. And we are only going to be blessed and be a blessing to others as we heed to the leadership of Holy Spirit. May you do that today, and may God bless you.